have the opportunity to meet with two other historians to talk about this topic. Yes, there are many other important roles both of you have had at the university, but I think it's important to found this conversation in history before we talk about the future. So thank you so much, President Leahy, for being with us, and Cristiano Casalini, who holds the Endowed Chair in Jesuit Pedagogy and Education History. Could you talk a bit about how that translated into the work of Catholic Jesuit colleges and universities in the U.S. context?
Well, it built on the immigrant church in the United States, and again, reflection on experience. The church in the United States in the 19th century was very much influenced by immigration. And aside from Georgetown and Holy Cross, those two early Jesuit schools, there was a Catholic community in Maryland and a little bit here in Massachusetts. But the mass of Jesuit schools came out of a need and a desire to help an immigrant church develop a more learned lay community. And so we started our schools where there were sizable populations of Catholics, and most of those were immigrant. And you can just look at the sweep of Jesuit foundations, Jesuit colleges, and later universities. It's generally where there were large groups of Catholic immigrants. So, for example, think of Buffalo, and then going to Milwaukee, Omaha, St. Louis, Chicago. There usually were the usual sites for Jesuit schools were cities. There are some exceptions to that, but the origins really lie in trying to respond to the needs of the Catholic community and then gradually respond to those desires for higher education. We started with colleges like Boston College in 1864, first classes. It was male, focused on a very classically oriented curriculum, languages, philosophy, all commuter, small. And then things evolved. And maybe we'll talk later, Elizabeth, about the importance of mission. But I say Jesuit schools came out of a desire to respond to the needs of the church and help Catholics move up primarily. It wasn't just for Catholics. There were Jewish Protestant students as well. But it was about need and trying to respond.
I think we should get into mission. How has that mission evolved? Because we're going to talk a bit about the future. We can't do that without talking about sources. But first, I want to talk a bit more about mission.
Well, I think, again, Cristiano can say more, but I think we started schools because we saw it was part of evangelization. That's a word we use today. But Jesuits started schools because they saw it as a way of not only helping individuals develop their talents, but also to use those talents for the good of others. And so mission is just critical. Always have in mind mission. And if I use Boston College as an example, when we opened near downtown Boston in the South End in 1864, that was the result of a long series of efforts by Father McElroy and then a lay partner named Kearney. And you see on our campus, we have Kearney Hall and McElroy Hall. Those two names are on those buildings in part because some Jesuits in the 1960s said we should recognize the partnership between McElroy and Kearney. So there always have been lay partners in Jesuit schools. We started that school in the South End because there was a desire for that kind of education, help uplift the immigrant community, primarily of Boston. But then it evolved. We didn't stay just an undergrad institution in the South End. We ran out of space, so we bought land out here in Chestnut Hill. And that was a big move. Father Gasson purchased this property over the objections of some of the Jesuits who were with him because they thought it was too far from the center of Boston and too much land. And they said, we'll never need that much land. Mission was defined more broadly by Father Gasson. And then later on, we added professional schools. Again, mission evolved, mission changed. And we grew not only in the number of schools, but also a number of individual schools at BC, but also student body. So mission can change. It's not locked in. And if you are really going to be effective, I think, you have to be able to evolve and read the signs of the times, and which is, I think, a big characteristic of St. Ignatius, adaptability.
What Father Leahy said is exactly the point. What marks the continuity of Jesuit thinking on education throughout the century is this strong belief in the transformative power of education, in the societal power of education. The Jesuits have always thought of growing through education people that could be leaders in their communities. And that's true from the early modern period on, no matter what is the social background of the students. When you think about the early modern period and you think about the expansion of these schools and the fact that they were for free, so everybody could take a class in a Jesuit school at that time, and you look at the statistics of students in Jesuit important high schools, you will see that many of them came not from the top social classes, but from the middle lower classes. The point of all that was exactly what Father Leahy said. The power of education to create leaders for communities stands in the fact that the main goal of the Jesuits when they enter the mission of educating is evangelization and saving souls. The power of education to save souls, the power of education for the greater good in the society. This morning I was reading 1539, the early deliberation of the companions. So the Jesuits are there, 1539. They cannot go together to the pilgrimage they plan to do to the Holy Land. And so they work in northern Italy, in Venice, and they work to preach and giving confessions and the like. And they meet together and they say, what do we do of us? So they had made this oath in 1534 to stick together as a group. And after 5 years, they say, what do we do now? What are we meant to be? They say, we should take the vow perhaps of obedience now. And they discuss this for weeks and weeks and weeks. And one of them makes this point. We should take it, but perhaps it could be that we need to build up a new religious order, because otherwise the Pope might tell us to go into another religious order, and in that religious order maybe the rule is not as powerful in letting us saving souls. Salvation of souls was the primary goal of that group, and I believe the connection with education comes directly from this companionship deliberation that they had.
And Cristiano, your words speak to me about the importance of vision. And all good things come out of some kind of powerful vision. And so Ignatius and his early companions shared a faith, obviously. They had an interest in the intellectual life. And as they thought about their call from God and how they might serve, they developed a very powerful vision. That vision shaped the mission that they ultimately entered into, and it was a vision and mission around education. So I say to many individuals, and I think a lot about the importance of vision. When groups and schools don't have vision, they drift, and I think they decline. That vision shapes mission, and then mission should in turn lead to decisions that reinforce the vision and the mission. There's a great reciprocal relationship between vision, mission, and decisions. And the document that you were talking about, the deliberations in 1539, show how they spent a great deal of time trying to listen to one another, identify what their impulses were, what their feelings were, and then it was what to do. Father Arupe, Superior General from 1965, Superior General of the Society of Jesus from 1965 until his stroke in the early 1980s, often would ask that question, what to do? Lots of opportunities, issues, needs, what to do? Well, the answer, I think, lies in having this compelling vision, which leads to a clear sense of mission and decisions that reinforce the vision and the mission. Powerful and ultimately essential.
And essential in that we need to know how to keep these stories, how to keep these memories and traditions alive and carried forward. And what other place to keep the culture and the mission going than in a university?
Absolutely. A university is a great repository of culture, and it can spread the mission, the knowledge, the heritage. And a university brings together people from different backgrounds, and they influence one another. And then for Ignatius and the early Jesuits and then their followers, they gave structure to that initial sense of experience and vision. And that's where the structure in Jesuit education around curriculum, as Father Pavor, who is here someplace today, will say, curriculum carries the mission. And I think in our case, so does residential life, volunteer service, and reflection. Those elements coming into our existence at BC are powerful. That's where our formative education has its roots. It's in those four kinds of aspects.
I don't know anywhere else that has a Department of Formative Education the way that we do. The chair, Chris Higgins, is here today, and you are a part of that department, Cristiano. Are these elements that we're talking about today, do we see those in the original sources? What does it mean to study sources in Jesuit pedagogy?
Jesuit culture is a living tradition, and in a tradition like this that values so much the concept of reflection from the spirituality to the government of the society itself, it is bound to happen that a culture of sources and record keeping spreads out. Everybody has heard the expression cura personalis, right? Everybody has heard magis, contemplatives in actions, men and women for others and with others. These are all Jesuit expressions, and I believe John O'Malley once said that it's typical of a Jesuit environment, that of posing the question, what is distinctive of our way of proceedings, and to come up with expressions that really try to grasp and simplify, right? The coordinates of what we do as Jesuit pedagogy. Sources are important to help this environment that constantly produces key expressions for self-understanding to root those expressions into the real tradition. The Instructio by Ledokowski to the American colleges. Mind that cura personalis is important in Jesuit environment, especially in the American and the Anglophone world. There is a historical origins for that. That's because the Superior General of the Society of Jesus, 1934, writes a letter to the American Jesuits and say, we need to grow a network, and there are some points on that, one of which is what we care about is the cura personalis alumnorum, that we now understand as the care of the whole person. Everybody says care of the whole person. Now, thanks to these studies that we do, and thanks to the fact that in this university we have an archive at Burns Library that has all the JEQ, Jesuit Educational Association material, we speak about this cura personalis as the care of the whole person. It's the personal interest of the educator in the students. So that expression, cura personalis, tells us something more about the tradition. Not only we care about the whole person of our students, but we care about the educator. So Jesuit sources in the history of Jesuit educators are almost always addressing the profile of the educator. We want an exceptional educator that is humanly exceptional. So humanly exceptional that this person needs to show a personal investment, a personal care about the student, which means knowing the student in their own individuality, right? It's much more than instructing students. It's caring about them.
It speaks to the importance of teachers. Teachers have huge responsibility, not only to help their students integrate the intellectual excellence but also the religious character, religious formation. So we need a model. And early Jesuit education, and Cristiano, you touched on this a little bit earlier, the teacher in Jesuit schools had many, many responsibilities, not just mastery of a certain body of knowledge, but the teacher was to be someone who was engaged in the personal lives of students. Sometimes that provided all kinds of inspiration, sometimes it was correction. But they played a major role in the lives of students. When I taught at a boarding high school in western Wisconsin in the early to mid 1970s, we scholastics, I was not ordained yet, we lived with the students, we taught the students, we had all kinds of activities with them. I still hear from students that I taught in the 1970s. There was a huge impact that those Jesuits and lay teachers had. And I think that happens at BC. I think there are teachers here at BC who have given their lives to this partnership that's Jesuit education, formative education. And they've stayed with us here at BC. We have faculty that are in their 70s and 80s still teaching at BC, still engaged, still alive. And that's so impressive.
We know that the core curriculum carries the mission, and we find in particular those faculty who teach in the core carry not only the expertise, but also that formative piece with them, in a way modeling to students both what we hope for them intellectually, but also how we hope they're growing their hearts and souls while they're at Boston College. This aspect of formative education is something that touches across campus, and that our faculty embody, I think, in a way that may not be asked of them in other institutions. So I had a faculty member come up to me the other day and say, quick, what does formative education mean in a sentence? Is there a sentence?
I'm not sure there's a sentence, but I think if you unpack the words, first you start with that noun, education to lead by the hand, and that means you're certainly enlarging the mind, the heart, and the soul. And then the adjective, formative. Jesuit education is very much about influencing, helping people be better. And I think it's tremendous that we are explicit about that. We say we want to, through our students, change the world. We want our students to be better human beings, but we clearly want to form. We inform, but we want to form so as to transform. And that, to me, is formative education. A key word, I think, in formative education is the word integration. It's to help students integrate not only the personal and the affective, the emotional aspects of their lives, but also what are they doing with their mind, heart, and soul. Scripture says that what we've received as a gift, we should give as a gift. Formative education is about trying to get students to not only identify their gifts, develop them, but then give them away. That's formative education. And the components or elements of that are things we talked about earlier. It's the curriculum. It's that residential living. It's volunteer service. It's having time to reflect. I was with a group of students the other night, and we were talking about, I asked them, do they take time to listen to themselves? And they said, we're too busy. Precisely why there's the need to pause, to take time to reflect, and help integrate the experiences. That, again, Ignatius in his early writings talks about the importance of pausing to look and see how God has entered into your life. What are the sources of consolation? And then also, what might be the things that trouble, desolation? And weigh those. Sometimes we need to change. Sometimes we need to share the gifts in a very particular way. So yes, Elizabeth, I think formative education, maybe not easily defined, but I think it can be very easily described.
And the key role of reflection, which I assume comes from the very beginning. Reflection is built into the university core curriculum. I see Mike Sacco here. We're fortunate to have a Center for Student Formation at Boston College. Last weekend I was on halftime with him and Brian Robinette, a faculty member in theology. We give our students time for reflection and model reflection as well. Does that come from the earliest days of the society and the educational mission?
Here I see a continuity between Ignatius' spirituality and the way that he, as a general, structured the Society of Jesus. One of my favorite early Jesuits is Peter Faber, right? So we have this fantastic memorial, the diary that he kept when he was sent to mission, right? What Peter Faber did when he was in mission, he was experiencing, living, finding God in all things. And then at the end of the day, he would get together, reflect upon the day, reflect upon the experience, pray before that, and write down in a narrative about these experiences and how did he saw God in all these experiences and how he could turn in purpose for the next day. So the diary of Peter Faber is really a model of this being a contemplative in action, using that expression that was coined by Nadal. So this idea constantly of acting, because the salvation of soul is the main goal, acting in the world and reflecting on that acting. Our way of proceeding is an expression that reflects exactly this need of the Society of Jesus as a collective body to constantly keep reflecting as a collective on the practices that we did. So that's why Jesuit education is a living tradition. They were able to reflect collectively about the practice that they were experimenting and adjust. This is something that is still going on. And this expands our notion of what are the sources in Jesuit education, reflecting on how to improve and how to make better ways of proceedings within the scope of Jesuit education.
Not only are we on the Heights, we're a beacon, I think, in many ways on the Heights. If we look at our built environment at Boston College and we think about mission, spirituality, and ourselves as an educational institution, where the sources are, we have 7 libraries at Boston College, 1.7 million visitors a year to our colleges. We have the new Catholic Religious Archives that we already have 41 different communities ascribed to. That will be a major research area going forward. But we also have the Center for Ignatian Spirituality, the Institute for Administrators in Catholic Higher Education, the Barbara and Patrick Roche Center for Catholic Education. I mentioned the Center for Student Formation, the Institute for Advanced Jesuit Studies that Cristiano is also a part of. We have the Boston College Prison Education Program, the Department of Formative Education, as I've mentioned, the BC Companions, Fellows for Leadership and Service, which is now a lifelong endeavor, Messina College, our newest college for 2-year program for students. And it goes on and on. So not only are we doing the good work, I think we are a beacon for those who are looking at the work that will come in the future. And we're doing that with intent and purpose.
And we're doing it in a time of great change in our world. Catholic higher education, Roman Catholicism, all religions have seen the ravaging effects of secularity and secularism. And so the church over its centuries has evolved. And one of the aspects of Jesuit education is to adapt. And there are changing times. BC has changed. Its mission in 1864 was focused on Boston. Now it's the world. And today we are much broader in our scope. Mission, though, I keep coming back to that because in the future, institutions that have a clear sense of mission, a compelling sense of mission, have a much higher likelihood of attracting students, faculty, staff, and supporters. And in our day, we are going to see a continued evolution of Jesuit schools in the United States and around the world, just as in Catholic higher education, or if you think of what's going on in our country today with federal interventions, executive orders, we have to adapt to changing circumstances. We have to know who we are. We have to have a grasp of our tradition. But we also have to realize not everything is going to go perfectly. There will be moments where we're going to struggle. And that's true in the history of Boston College. But I do think the need for BC and for Jesuit education is greater now than it's ever been. And what we very much need is individuals to get prepared in fields of whatever, come back to Boston College, join our faculty, be in administration, and then we need those who go out into various professions who make a lot of money, give money back to BC. Critical. Got to have that reality is there because it's a big investment. And we're constantly trying to raise resources and teach individuals about the mission of BC and how they can help make it better. So we evolve. We have to. It's grow or die.
Before you join me in thanking Cristiano and Father Leahy, I want to remind us of Psalm 18. And my friends, we've all been set on the heights. And what are the heights if not a stronghold and a place of safety? So I hope it continues to be a stronghold and a place of safety for higher education, for the liberal arts, and for the Jesuit mission.